Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for our first event of 2025. Feels very weird to say that still. My name is Jasper Dent, and I'm the events coordinator here at McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory. This is the land of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of What a Farmer Wants You to Know About Food by Dennis Bulani. Thank you so much to Dennis for being here tonight and for working with us to make this event happen. We've got some folks joining us online tonight, so hello to them. We've got a web camera up to the right here. We won't be filming the audience, just the stage area up here. But if your cell phone goes off during the event, the web camera will pick that up. So now's a great time to mute or turn off your phones. If you'd like to buy copies of Dennis's books, we have some up here on the signing table. We also have some on the desk by where you first walked in. You're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it. We just ask that you please remember to stop by the cash desk on your way out. Based in Biggar, Saskatchewan, Dennis Bulani is a fourth-generation farmer, business owner, father, and grandfather who spent a lifetime growing safe, healthy, and sustainable food. He's a founding member and current director of AgLink Canada and CEO of Petroleum Limited. Dennis has worked in the Canadian agriculture industry for nearly 40 years and is known widely for his contributions to agronomic knowledge and research. He's acted as a keynote speaker for national and international conferences and events, and he has graced us with his presence tonight to speak to all of us. Everyone, please give Dennis a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Jasper, and thank you, Robinson McNally, for hosting this event. I appreciate it. This is like my first attempt at like a book signing. Like you see it on TV and everything. And my wife said she was going to buy me a plaid suit coat and then one of them weird little hats and patches on the arms. But we didn't do that. So but I do have the long hair of an author. So there's actually a story behind that. Some people haven't seen me in a while. And they said, well, where the hell did that long hair come from? And I actually started to write a novel 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I said to my wife and all the people that know me, I'm not cutting my hair until I publish the novel. Now, the novel is a science fiction novel about chaos theory, so I'm hoping to come back here in a year or so and launch this new novel, so my hair will get longer. So in between all of that, between the farming and Petroleum and everything else that goes on, What a Farmer Wants You to Know About Food came about. So, and I'll tell you a little bit tonight about it. My little talk here is about 15 minutes long or so, and I just want to cover, some of the background as to why I wrote it and so on. So, thank you for joining me. It's really important. This is an important moment for me personally. Not because there's a book here with my name on it, but because it's starting a conversation that we want the book to trigger. And in the spring last year, I was down in Phoenix, Arizona at a conference of entrepreneurs from all over the world. And at that conference, the host of the conference brought up a guest speaker. And the guest speaker got up and literally started denigrating everything I've done in my life. He slammed fertilizer, crop protection products, canola oil, farming. And I was pretty upset. And but I didn't know that it was the hill I wanted to die on, because the audience was rallying right behind him. And so I felt that I was holding back. And, I was mad at myself for holding back, because I didn't go to the microphone and challenge the speaker. But what I did do is I went up after the speech and I called them both aside and said, I was pretty upset. I said, you know what, everything you said is bullshit. It's not true. And it's misconception, and it's not fair that you're acting like you know everything about farming when in fact neither of you have never been to a farm, and you're acting like, why didn't you invite me up to say something? And they said, well, we didn't know about you to start with. And I said, well, you do now. He said, well, if what we said on stage was incorrect, then prove it to us. And I'm a real believer in critical thinking. I think our society is losing its critical thinkers. And by critical thinking, I mean you don't just read one sentence on Twitter, read 10 of those and then think you're an acclaimed professional or expert in the subject. Because critical thinking requires deep thought and questioning everything. And it occurred to me that when I do things on my farm, I question everything. If a new crop protection product comes onto the market, I question it. Is it safe? Will it affect the food I grow? Will it affect my children? Will it affect my soil? And it occurred to me that all the questions consumers ask me that I'm sometimes scared to get in an argument with and defend, I already have asked. So I left from that conference and I thought to myself, I'll correct this. So I wrote them a 45-page letter. It took me a month and a half, but I researched everything they had said and I presented in my mind logical, critical thinking as to why their assumptions were incorrect, backed up by numerous peer-reviewed research articles about food. And I researched cancer deaths. Incidentally, just to give you a background, the speaker, and I felt bad for him, his mother had just recently passed away from pancreatic cancer. And he was claiming that the fact that she loved Doritos, which have canola oil in them, was probably the cause of her death. To the point where after the funeral, his dad was eating Doritos in the living room after the funeral. And he went to his father and he grabbed that bag of Doritos and he threw it in the corner and he said to his father, "How could you denigrate my mother's spirit by eating these Doritos?" And this is the sensationalism of this speaker. So I actually researched pancreatic cancer and I found out that pancreatic cancer diagnoses rates have not changed in 30 years. And of course, canola oil consumption has increased in the last 30 years. So that was part of my argument that I thought that pancreatic cancer is probably more related to genetics and perhaps some lifestyle and maybe some general dietary things. Well, I'm a fourth generation farmer, and I was heartbroken. I've spent my life growing food. I started business to support farmers in Western Canada. I've created a research division with my own PhD scientist to research better ways to grow safe and efficient, sustainable food. And outside of the story of farming, the story being told by highly influential people is the wrong story. I felt like I shouldn't hold back anymore. And I was really upset that they didn't ask a farmer for what he thought. At the end of the day, this discussion isn't about good or bad. It's not about right or wrong. It's about understanding. And people are scared, let's face it. Consumers are scared and they're trusting the stories that they're hearing because they're not hearing the farmer's side of the story. So you can't blame them, and they are asking legitimate questions. Yes, the food we grow on our farms is safe to eat. How much of it you eat and in what balance is maybe the question. Did you know that the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity has released statistics just very recently? Only 3 in 10 Canadians, 31%, believe our food system is on the right track. Only 1 in 5 Canadians trust farming practices. But and the but is big. 90% of Canadians trust what a farmer says. Now, it's interesting that most farmers, myself included, farmers like to farm. They go out and they like to do their farming stuff. And they generally, myself included, tend to avoid conflict and controversy. But think about this. If farmers are trusted at 90%, then it's their voice that matters. So why do farmers not speak up when they're challenged by a relative from a large city? By an Aunt Karen? The reason is because farmers want to be right. And they want to be so correct that they don't want to be wrong. So if they don't have all the information at their fingertips, it's easier to change the subject than it is to have the information at the fingertips. So that's why I wrote a book. I said, I'm going to put everything in one book that even when I get challenged, it's right there beside me and I know it's factually correct. That's why I'm here. That's why I wrote the book. The book is here to tell our story. If you read the dedication in the front of the book, it is dedicated to the grocery shopper. The grocery shopper in downtown Toronto, New York, LA, Regina, Saskatoon, wherever that grocery shopper is. It is also dedicated to farmers, but it is dedicated to farmers to use as a tool to talk to their consumer friends, their customers actually, and be a little more confident to enter a discussion and create a conversation that is long overdue between the farmer and the consumer so they have a better understanding. And so they can maybe think about being critical thinkers. If you ask me what it's like to write a book, it reminds me of a joke. And the joke is, so a lot of people have said, gee, Dennis, like, who would have thought you would write a book? And I said, well, how hard is it to write a book? I said, well, I can tell you how hard it is to write a book. This joke tells the story. This author dies. And when he gets to the pearly gates, he has a choice to choose between heaven and hell. And he says, well, what I'd really like is the option to look at both, and then I'll decide. So he was given permission to look at both. So he went down into hell, and he went into this room, and in this room were lines and lines of desks, and all these writers and authors were chained to the desks. And every now and then somebody would come along with a thorny twig and whip them on the back. He thought, well, that's not what I want. So he thought, I'll check out heaven. So he went up to heaven and he went into this room, and there it was again, all these authors and writers chained to a desk. And every now and then somebody would come and beat them with a stick. And he said to the voice, like, I don't see the difference here. They're the same. And the voice said, but up here in heaven, you get published. So that is actually how painful it can be to maybe write a book some days. This book is just the beginning. H.G. Wells, how many know who H.G. Wells is? He's the author that wrote The War of the Worlds, science author and actually a futurist. This quote really sticks in my mind, and it's in the book. Civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. Let us learn the truth and spread it as far and wide as our circumstances allow. For the truth is the greatest weapon we have. If society starts legislating law based on public opinion and fear, with no science, no critical thinking, that is to me a catastrophe. We are in danger now with RFK talking about banning seed oils. making all food by law organically produced. By the way, it would probably be a boom for Canada if we didn't do it, because we'd be selling them way more grain. Incidentally, about 3 to 4 billion people would be starving today if we were to ban worldwide synthetic fertilizer. Think about that. 3 to 4 billion people would be starving today if we were all forced to grow organic food, because organic food is coming from farms that want to accomplish the same thing we do. However, it is difficult to produce the same level of production without organic synthesized fertilizer. Here's an interesting paradigm for you. Did you know that organic growers inadvertently use synthetic nitrogen or nitrogen? Did you know that? Well, they do. Every year, lightning creates 10 to 12 pounds of nitrates that falls from the sky when it rains with a thunderstorm, and the same exact nitrogen falls from the sky naturally as we would use with synthetic fertilizers. You could test your lettuce and you would not know if the nitrogen came from lightning, animal manure, or synthetic fertilizer. Many of the countries in the world thought about this paradigm in society. How should society advance? World War II was very devastating to the world, as we all know. And a lot of critical thinkers got together and said, if we want to rebuild the world after World War II, what checks and balances should we put into place to govern the development of new technology? What checks and balances should we all agree upon would be a fair way to evaluate new technology and see if it's safe or not safe? So the OECD, this is in my book, was formed, and these countries formed protocols. Here's what they said. If a new compound or chemical is invented and it has a benefit to society, we need to prove it's safe. We need to all agree that the protocols to prove it's safe or not safe are standardized worldwide. And so they did. They developed a protocol to evaluate carcinogenity of a compound. Is it harmful to human health? Is it harmful to the environment? And we must test it, and it must be peer reviewed, and it must be researched by scientists all over the world. One set of data is not good enough. This has to be looked at closely, and if it can pass all these tests, we can deem that it's either a hazard or it's a risk or it's both, but in fact it's safe for society, and then we can advance society. So they developed hazard versus risk. Now let's think about the two. Is there a difference between hazard and risk? Let me use an example. Tylenol. If you sit down and read the Tylenol label, how many have read the Tylenol label lately? You were bored and you just thought, I'll read this 45-page document, right? Interestingly enough, Tylenol will tell you that it will cause liver damage if it's used in the improper dose. It will cause liver damage if it's mixed with other pharmaceuticals that have a set of acetaminosin in it. That's the hazard. The hazard is it will cause liver damage. The risk is if you only use 2 tablets every 6 hours, that it will not cause liver damage. So the risk is very low for Tylenol if used properly, but it's still a hazard. Now, Tylenol had to go through the same protocols, maybe not exactly the same as a crop protection product, i.e. glyphosate, but at the end of the day, the compound is deemed a hazard. We know that this is hazardous if you soak yourself in it or maybe drink it, but it's a low risk if it's used at the proper dosage rate, at the proper time, in the proper place, on the proper crop, and so on and so forth. And farmers follow these prescriptions all the time. I was doing a calculation on my farm, and can I have a volunteer from the audience to help me with this little demonstration? My farm uses, there's an eyedropper down there. Yeah, right there. You pull it up. Yeah, pull some water up in there. Yeah. Is it full?
Yeah.
Okay, now what I'd like you to do is make one droplet of water above this piece of paper. Just one droplet. Okay. Now, you see that droplet? Can I spread it across this piece of paper? Pretty hard, right? 1/3 of that drop, thank you, Jackie.
That's it.
1/3 of that droplet of water is the total amount of pesticides the average Western Canadian farmer uses. The speaker said that I was pouring poison onto the land. If that's pouring poison onto the land, I don't know. But 1/3 of that eye droplet is actually the exact amount that I use on my farm in an entire year. And by the way, it's placed on that soil when there's no seeds there in most cases. So it's put there before the seeds even develop. And so that is one of the tools we use in agriculture to ensure that crop protection products don't end up in our food chain. So the process that the OEC developed has now even gotten better and better and better since World War II. Right now, 138 countries in the world participate and adhere to the protocols of registering new compounds and new chemicals and new whatever, antiperspirants, mascara, household cleaners. Every new chemical has to go through the same process. So it's pretty exciting. And I know that a lot of people will get up in the morning and put that chemical on their armpits for an antiperspirant and not think twice. And it's interesting that the average person could probably do a urine test and find probably 200 to 300 parts per million of triclosan in their urine, which we know doesn't hurt you. But there's many household compounds that, because we're so good at testing products and other products with mass spectrophotometry, that we can detect, we can detect how much boron is in the soil on the moon without going there. So that's how amazing our technology is. And by the way, when somebody says to you, we found a part per million of a compound in your urine, do you know what 1 part per million really is? Sounds like it's just a big number, and it's hard to, especially for me, I'm mathematically uninclined. 1 part per million is 1 inch in 16 miles. So a consumer might say to me, we found a part per million of probably any chemical we use in the world in something. That's 1 inch in 16 miles. In other words, there is none, but it's detectable. So, and yet there are people who want to reverse all the advances we have made in society, 138 countries, all these protocols since World War II to ensure that we have a safe system. What a farmer wants you to know about food tackles the tough topics we hear about: pesticides, GMOs, seed oils. I cited 164 references in 156 pages. I hired 4 fact finders to fact check what I had said, because sometimes you say things you know it's from memory or whatever, but 4 fact checkers that in New York professionally fact check books. And so I wanted to ensure as a farmer that what I said was valid. So then I tried to convert it into an easy, relatable comparison in the book. And I wanted to make it a little bit easier of a read. So sometimes too much science just is a little bit too tough to absorb. Let's talk about diabetes. Organic producers are not allowed to use GMO crops. Yet, the same organic producers, some of which may have diabetes, inject themselves every day with GMO insulin. Did you know that all insulin, synthetic now, was the godsend to man? Was over 6 million people in the world now have synthetic insulin created by GMO, and yet these same people will inject it into their bodies but are not allowed to use it on the farm. GMO insulin has saved thousands of lives. How many of you love sweet potatoes? Okay. Did you know that Mother Nature created the sweet potato GMO? How many knew that? No, it's a fact. They've now discovered that the sweet potato was created by nature through genetic modification by an organism that lives in your backyard called Agrobacter. Agrobacter is a weird little beast. He goes around and he looks for a plant that has a cut or that's sweating sap. When they sense it, they go there and they inject, like a mosquito, their DNA, and they make the plant grow a gall. How many of you walked through a forest and seen a lump on the side of a tree? Okay, that's a gall. Agrobacter made that. So Agrobacter travels around and makes the gall, and then the gall secretes a special sugar that then they live off of. So they kind of modify the host to survive. A symbiotic relationship, really. So inadvertently, the odd minuscule time Agrobacter accidentally injected the DNA from another organism that turned the potato sweet. That is the identical way we developed GMO canola. Exactly the same methodology, except Agrobacter did it through nature and we did it in a lab. The science of farming is centered around growing the healthiest, safest food, the most efficient way possible to feed as many people as we can. Farmers have all asked the same question consumers ask. We are essentially the guardians at the gate. Whether you like it or not, the farmer is the keeper of the gate. He will choose to produce food safely or not safely. I like to equate it to the pilot of an airplane. Why do I feel farmers are great keepers of the gate? Because they don't want to poison their kids. They don't want to poison the food they sell. They have pride in their land and their soil. And so it's like when you get on a jet and you fly with an airplane, you know that pretty good chance you're going to land because the pilot's, he's at risk also. And I think the same applies to farmers. One example I want to leave with you that is really quite sad. Golden rice. How many people have heard of golden rice? Golden rice is a GMO, genetically engineered variety of rice designed to combat vitamin A deficiency, a major public health issue in mostly Africa, low-income countries where malnutrition is widespread. Vitamin A deficiency is the leading cause of childhood blindness and significantly increases the risk of infection and death. Most of these children in Africa go blind in the first year, and the second year they die if they're not corrected from their vitamin A deficiency. Back in the day, Monsanto developed golden rice. They injected a gene so the rice would make vitamin A. They donated the technology to these people. They didn't charge for it, they donated it, and yet Greenpeace lobbied, and all the elite people from North America that think they're better than everybody else. And to this day, Greenpeace has kiboshed the introduction of golden rice to Africa. And yet if they would introduce it tomorrow within the space of 4 months, we would save 1.5 to 2 million children's blindness and lives in Africa. Very sad story. And there's a bit more of it in my book. The old leader of Greenpeace actually converted now that he understood how much damage he caused these people in Africa by fighting GMO golden rice. The real question is, how long can we afford to wait? So this is just the start of a campaign to change the conversation. We launched a website called trustyourplate.com. You have your phone, I'd appreciate if you follow trustyourplate.com. It is going to be a nucleus where we are going to urge other farmers to tell their stories and try and make it a main place where everyone can go to see the good story that farmers need to tell. And today is the beginning of the first campaign in US and Canada. Thank you, McNally Robinson. This is the official public consumer launch. We intend to approach CBC and all the national news media to expose the book to consumers in Toronto, Montreal, right across Canada. And we are launching in the United States at the Denver Commodity Classic the first week of March, along with a consumer media group that has access to all the consumer talk shows and so on and so forth. I believe the book will be successful in creating a conversation if it ends up in the hands of the grocery shopper. Here in Western Canada, we already have strong support for farming. I want to capitalize on that strength and the voice of the farmer, which is 90% believable. Whether you're a farmer or you know farmers or support the work farmers do, we need to share the story. And the material in the book can support you with the facts. If you're new to the topic of farming and food, but interested in learning science or learning more or becoming more of a critical thinker, the book is a great resource to provide a different side of the conversation. The only way to change the conversation is for, like how you eat an elephant, 1 teaspoon at a time, but we need to start the conversation 1 consumer at a time. Let's do that now. And what I'd like to say at the end of the day, that this isn't about good or bad. It's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about understanding and critical thinking. People are scared and they're trusting the stories they're hearing because they're not hearing ours. Before I do the signing, I'd like to acknowledge the very special people who played an important role in this book. Dr. Aaron Corey is our PhD researcher. Thank you, Dr. Aaron. PhD extraordinaire for helping me fact check and correcting me when I put something in there that was not quite perfect. Shannon Walker, Director of Ultimate Yield Agronomy and Research Division. Thank you for proofreading, and there you are there. Thank you, Shannon. And for those agros, I don't know if you know, but Shannon is Burry Walker's daughter. So university friend, and we're real thrilled to have his family working with our company. Troy LaForge, who is an agronomist of the year with the CARE in Canada, and our senior agronomist at Ultimate Yield. I have had the pleasure to work with Troy for 10 or 12 years now, and he's been an inspiration for me to get this book done. Where's Troy? Thank you, Troy. Moira Knight, where's Moira? Hi, Moira. Moira is a grade 12 classmate from Bigger, and she's had a lot of experience with the Saskatoon Star Phoenix for many years and a good friend, and she's helped over the odd glass of wine try and help me pick a good book cover, and she's going to be one of my trusted assistants at the crop production show next week, where we will be selling the book. Thank you, Moira. Michael Levine, who is not here, is a master of books, and his guidance in bringing this book to life. He lives in New York. He's a long distance runner, marathon runner. He is a specialist in pushing people to write a book. For 30 years, he only bought his groceries at Whole Foods. Now, since he's met me, he refuses to go to Whole Foods. So I'm pretty thrilled about it. He was quite taken back. You know, when I was talking to him about the book, this is interesting because he said, well, I don't know if I believe what you're telling me about like organic bread and stuff. And I said, well, why don't you go to the grocery store? And I said, how do you buy your flour for when you cook stuff or bake stuff? And he said, I buy it in a little 5-pound, like the smallest bag of flour. And I said, go and price it out at Whole Foods, and it's whole wheat organic flour. And I said, then go price out the exact same bag of whole wheat flour at wherever else, and tell me what you find out. And he priced out that bag of flour, and it was $12.35 US at Whole Foods, and it was $3.50 at Sobeys or the other store. He said, you know what, in 30 years, I never thought to think about this. So it's pretty exciting story. I want to tell you another story. Megan, she works for the company that is doing my marketing of the book in Toronto. She's a single mother with 2 children. And of course, I met her, and she's from downtown Toronto, and she was apprehensive a bit. And then she read the book, and she said, you know, when I grew up as a girl, my dad owned a corner grocery store in Toronto, and every Friday I got to go with him to restock the shelves, go to the market in Toronto and the wholesale market and buy like vegetables and canned goods and restock the shelves. And she said it was such a thrill to go to the grocery store with her dad to that place. And she said, now that I have my children, I go to the grocery store and I absolutely despise going grocery shopping because I have my cell phone in one hand and I'm scared I'm going to poison my kids. I have to look at every label, and I absolutely dread going to the grocery store. But since I read your book, I, for the first time in 30 years, got that same sensation I used to get when I traveled with my father. So, and I said, well, my wife will attest to this. Don't send me to the grocery store because I absolutely love going to a grocery store because it's just, I don't even think about that. And it's occurred to me that more people are going to die from the stress of thinking the food is unsafe than from the actual food. Michael Levine was a real rock star in helping me, and I think he's online. Hi, Michael, if you are. Patricia Bacal is my dedicated and patient book designer and publisher consultant for the production. She did use AI to help me design the cover. Every time she pulled up What a Farmer Wants to Grow About Food and say to AI, please develop a cover, it brought up a guy with a pitchfork and coveralls. That is what AI thinks of farmers. And of course, we know that it's not that case at all. I want to especially thank my 3 daughters, Chelsea, who helped immensely proofread and assist with edits because I'm not good with Word. Where's Chelsea? Thank you so much, Chelsea. Cassandra, my middle daughter, who I work with every day. There you are.
The middle one.
After Rob, the middle one. To help allocate company resources and make time for the book Distraction from Our Everyday Business. Cora Lee, our youngest from Williston, North Dakota. Cora Lee, thank you so much for your moral support and staying positive, Cora Lee, about all the stress of me writing the book and not giving up the book and not persevering, and for driving up from Williston to be with us today. Thank you very much. Most importantly, my wife, Linda, for her support, because she said, Dennis, you're so crabby until you write a book. Like, I was very upset for a very long time from that, and I'm thrilled that you stuck with me, dear. And finally, all my farmer friends, industry partners, and personal friends for allowing me the opportunity to work with them in this wonderful industry of agriculture. So thank you very much for coming, and I will take a few questions if there are any before we do the signing.
What would you give your younger self advice you know now that you didn't know when you were younger? What would you tell yourself?
You don't know what you don't know. Trust your critical thinking. I don't think I'd ever be on my deathbed and wish I'd partied less. I guess I look at it two ways. There are people that are elves and there are people that are halves. This comes from Joe Polish, a friend of mine, and there are elves, and elf people are easy, lucrative, and fun. And half people are hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. And every time I run into a new person that I'm meeting, I think to myself, is that an elf or a half? Because I make sure that there are no halves in my life. And here I am at 68, still alive. People may wonder what, but yeah. Thank you for the question.
Anyone else says, yeah, I can bring you the microphone here.
Good to see you again, Dennis. About 10 years ago this month, I was part of a group of farmers who, in their job as directors of Saskatoon, went to the Royal Winter Fair as a bit of with a booth there to help promote canola oil and also hear from consumers and meet other farmers of Ontario, where canola isn't a big crop and wasn't never going to be, but they also grew GMO wheat and corn and soybeans and some canola. But canola oil in Canada isn't as nearly as well known in Ontario, so we were trying to promote the virtues of canola oil of others. There was a farmer that came actually to the booth, but I think a dairy farmer who was concerned about GMOs, and I kind of quoted chapter and verse, if you will, some of the things that you mentioned, and all of a sudden he says, "Yeah, I was at a meeting the other night. All they talked about was the science. Don't you have anything more?" What more can you then say to someone who doesn't want to believe any of the science?
Well, I guess I would immediately go to do you practice critical thinking? And if you practice critical thinking, you have to have some form of logic into how you make a decision. So I would challenge that same individual to say, what form of logic do you use to come to a conclusion if scientific research is not available to you? Do you want us to use emotion? Should we register new oils because we feel like they're good? Should we register them because some person is peddling some new diet plan and some celery juice that nobody knows about? Or should we use a logical approach? And I believe that person can eat what they want, and maybe they don't want to eat canola oil, and that's perfectly fine. It's a free world. And so I would say that unless you can answer that question to me, it's going to be difficult to carry on the conversation, because I need to understand what you're really asking of me. So maybe it doesn't answer the question, but
That's good.
yeah. I always go to critical thinking, and I think to myself, critical thinkers, if you force yourself to be a critical thinker, then you force yourself to be logical. And if you force yourself to be logical, you're actually willing to change your mind. But some people don't want to change their minds. They're set in their ways, and that's fine. It's a wonderful free world. But you have to be critical thinkers are prepared to change their direction. And of course, our science is always evolving, so we're understanding more and more all the time and building on what we've built as a society in history. So I have great confidence in society because of all the protocols we've put in place. And sometimes the legislations drive me crazy, but I think they're there for a good reason. And I think that's how we can brag about safe food. By the way, when it comes to canola oil, I don't drink the shit. I mean, I just pour a little bit in my frying pan to keep my eggs from sticking. I just don't get the big deal, but.
Hello, Dennis. So in your book, you have a chapter about food additives. And there's a, you know, perception sometimes with the population that additives aren't safe. Can you sort of explain to us, for example, nitrates in meat or other additives, how we get across to the consumer that these are actually worthwhile going into food production?
Well, it's interesting that people, you know, food preservatives has a negative connotation in, at least in social media. And I say, well, food preservatives actually preserve the quality of the food. You know, I talk about this in my book. My mother and my grandmother used to can tomatoes in the mason jars, and the number one killer of the early people in the 20s and 30s was botulism in tomatoes. If they were not canned properly, botulism is probably the most lethal compound known to man, and Mother Nature makes her. Most food preservatives, including nitrates, are used for one reason. Meat is moist food. And the first thing you get in meat very quickly, that's why we refrigerate it and so on, is botulism. So to keep society safe, we have to have a way to treat the botulism that could form in these processed meats, which I love, by the way. Now, I will tell you this, and it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it because it is in my book. You must have read that chapter. But so they use 200 parts per million of nitrates in meat. That's the level needed to control botulism. So when nitrates first came about, there was one research paper done by a WAC that's been discredited. So that's why chaos and science can be good. But if science is used in the wrong way, it can be bad. And that's an instance where it was bad, where the actual researcher didn't use proper protocol. He was peer reviewed by other countries, and they said, you know what, the way you did your research, we can't accept it anymore. But initially it was accepted. And so then it got a bad name. And even to this day, many people think nitrates are going to cause cancer, right? How many people believe that or have heard that? Yeah, no, yeah. Okay, so here's what's interesting. They've researched nitrates to the core, and it is in many of our foods, including some cheese. And nitrates at 200 parts per million will kill botulism. And the odds of you getting botulism from meat that's not preserved is quite high, actually. So that's how we ensure that that food is safe. So we know that 95% of the research says nitrates are safe in food at 200 parts per million. Well, here's an interesting thing. Where else do you get nitrates when you eat food? Anybody know? Green lettuce. When you eat lettuce, the nitrate, that's why they're green. You get a dosage of nitrates that is far, far, far greater than 200 parts per million. Nitrates, the same nitrates that's in lettuce, leafy green vegetables, is much higher than 200 parts per million. So I wouldn't be scared of it at all. Now, on the outside chance that in the next 50 years, they discover some obscene way that nitrates, in fact, do cause carcinogenity or cancer, the minuscule chance that that could happen based on the research is what you must weigh in terms of the hazard and the risk. And I would sooner bet my money on give me some nitrates in my processed meats, because botulism is a guaranteed death sentence, and nitrates are maybe just fear mongering. Thank you, Brian, for that question.
Out of your family legacy, what stood out to you was the most important for you to expand and continue your family legacy?
So I think most people in Saskatchewan are raised with extreme admiration for their small communities, the land and the farm. And that passion, I think, was passed on from my great-grandfather to my grandfather to my father, and that we should always care for the land. But I will tell you that technology changed, but the desire to make the land as healthy as possible for the next generations never went away, and to this day does not go away. And it's in my book too, but as farmers get larger, a lot of consumers say, oh, I only want to deal with small farms. These big mass corporate farms they're doing everything, terrible. And I say to those same people, okay, wait a minute now. You own 4 businesses in 4 cities and you keep expanding, and it's okay for you to expand, but me as a farmer, I'm not allowed to expand. It's really quite as silly, but 88% of farms in North America are family owned. So the same passion and desire to take care of the soil does not go away just because farms get bigger. And so I guess it gets indoctrinated as you grow up, and there's a love of the land and the soil. And when I was a kid, I used to eat it. I don't anymore, but so I would say it's a passion that just, I think it's inherent in most family farms.
Hi, Dennis. Thanks for writing the book to begin with. It's about time. One of the things is in the agriculture industry, we spend a lot of time preaching to the choir. And my question is, when will we be able to get a book like this to educate the educators, to start to educate the College of Education and the doctors and nurses and dentists to understand that nutrition is such a priority, and that a teacher shouldn't stand up in front of the class and say everybody has to eat organic. When can the agriculture sector break through to the other colleges to actually educate the educators to understand clearer what we're eating?
I think it's upon us to start tomorrow. Buy the book and go give it to your local school teacher. I know some of my staff in Bigger have issues with the science teacher maybe sending the wrong message, and the science teacher may be right or may be wrong, and that's not the point. But so I would urge, here's what I would do is I would take the book to these people and say, please read the book. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. How does the concept in this book relate to what you teach today? And is there anything in the book that you disagree with? Because if you don't disagree with it, this is using critical thinking, right? Logic, then you should be teaching it. And I've actually had a small organization approach me and ask me if actually in Alberta, the education minister, one of the ministers in the Alberta government has already asked me if they could submit our book to be at least one of the reading materials in the curriculum in grade 10, 11, and 12 in Alberta. And I'm actually working with that MLA in Alberta to do that. And my goal would be to hopefully do that here. And I am not a specialist in what it has to be in a curriculum. I don't know what in my book would be bad for a school child, and maybe somebody would invent one, but it certainly would be our goal. But I would say you start eating the elephant tomorrow morning, and you get out of one conversation at a time. That's the only way we're going to change it. And by the way, there's only 2% of us that are farmers, and the other 98% are not farmers. So we get drowned up and swallowed up pretty quick. It's a great question. Thank you, Gail.
Hey, Dennis, you and I go back a long time. And, I remember you from when we grew up in Bigger. And just one quick comment. You need to write a book about your story, your life story, because you had to know Dennis back in grade 11 and see where he is today. It's amazing. And I hope you do write your memoir someday. I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you, though. You remember Harry Biernes from Bigger? Yeah, Harry was a friend of mine. I remember, in the early days when you were getting going and things were starting to roll and you had your business going. He used to have these little information meetings in Bigger all the time. And he used to go, and I said, well, what do you think of that, Harry? And he goes, well, I don't know, that he's got a lot of crazy ideas. And I'm thinking to myself, but Dennis is a critical thinker. And I was thinking, Harry was kind of stuck in his old ways. Like, how hard was it for you to kind of make the shift, even in your hometown, and get people starting to think about, farming the way you do today?
So I'm a believer in asking why over and over again. And if those of you that know me personally know that I love to argue. I was raised to argue. And I argue not to get in a fight. I argue to try and get my mind around what is the right answer or the wrong answer. And you're right, because you move away from home and you're in rural Saskatchewan and you have these ideas. And then the big shock to me was when I moved to Saskatoon, went to college and ran into all these other people that had different ideas than all the people I knew. And it was one hell of a shock. And so then I always believed that a critical thinker should always be willing to change his things. And I can honestly tell you that I don't know if I should admit this publicly, but I have voted for all three political segments in my lifetime. So I believe that the ability to make an assumption and later on acknowledge that you were incorrect is to be bowed down to. It's a great character quality to say, you know what, I was wrong. Actually, I was telling Linda the other day, I said, you know what? She said, you're wrong. But it turned out a week later, I was actually right. Thank you, Tom. I don't know if that answers it or not. How are we doing for time here, Jasper? Good.
Time for one more question.
Okay.
Sorry. Somebody up here who wanted to ask you a question. Oh, okay.
Hello, Dennis. First of all, I'd like to preface this with thank you for the blood, sweat, and tears with this book, and in no way am I trying to heckle you with this question. Monsanto, maker of Roundup, in 2018, they were ordered to pay out roughly $80 million to a groundskeeper, 42-year-old from California. In 2020, 100,000 claims, $10 billion dollars in payouts, and they're still advertising for more claims to be made.
Absolutely, and that's a great.
How?
Why is that happening? And that's a great question. And part of it is lack of understanding. Now, you can say, well, a court of law in California, I might add, San Francisco, California. It was a jury of 12, and actually RFK Kennedy was the lawyer who won that lawsuit. Yes, he was. He led the first lawsuit against Monsanto. And the lawsuit was the groundskeeper that had developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he had been spraying Roundup without mitts or gloves or any personal protective gear. And the jury was 12 people that know nothing about science, 12 non-critical thinkers is what I would say. I don't know them personally. And so here's the analogy. If there's a trial and a jury of 12 non-physicists, non-geologists, if the trial is the earth flat? And 12 jurors rule that the earth is flat. Does that in fact make it flat? Right? And so can a jury defy science? And at the end of the day, this is actually, you can read into that case because I've read it. Monsanto was never found that glyphosate caused cancer or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was actually inferred. Roundup was invented in 75 roughly. And from 75 to 95, the number of cases of diagnoses of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma went up considerably. But then in 95, Roundup Ready GMO crops came and Roundup took off like exponential use. And non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after 95 did not increase. You can actually look this up. It has not increased since the introduction of GMO crops. Now, the question you would ask is, well, why did that happen? Well, the evidence presented at that trial was that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma increased exponentially from 75 to 95, and therefore correlations would tell you that it had to be the glyphosate. But in my book, I talk about this. Correlation is not causation. What else happened between 75 and 95 that you know of? AIDS. AIDS. So people that were predisposed from the disease of AIDS, that is part of why, what you could explain why the rates went up. Medicine got much better in diagnosing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in those same years. So was it in fact a statistical increase in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, or were we better at finding it? Is the question. What we do know, if you believe in correlation is causation, is that after 95 and even to this day, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is actually flat and declining. You know, we believe that cancer rates are going up. All cancer rates except pancreatic and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are actually on the decrease at 1 to 2% per year. But I will tell you this, we are living much longer. When I was born, the life expectancy of me, a male, was about, no, it wasn't even 70. No, the life expectancy was like 68. Sorry, well, yeah, about 68, which means I'm 68 today. I should be dead. Actually, the way I partied, some people say. But so here I am today, and now the life expectancy in Canada is 78. So we've increased our life expectancy, but when you get older, what else happens? Your genetics break down, and you may be more predisposed to these diseases. But the actual diagnoses, and people have challenged me about this. They say, well, our medicine's better, so we're curing more cancer, so therefore there's less deaths. So if you look at death rate, that is not a good way to measure it. You have to measure how many people are actually diagnosed with it in the first place, because that will tell you if it's in fact increasing in society or decreasing, and it's decreasing. By the way, when you get to the glyphosate thing, the last 5 cases have hands down been lost. Europe has now 121 scientists in Europe have reinstated just last year glyphosate in Europe. Use is back on the up. And here's what they discovered. You're going to be shocked with this one. So they, in Germany and Netherlands and a big chunk of Europe, they decided a number of years ago to limit the use of glyphosate on farms near the Rhine River, or near the river system in Europe. So they decreased use of glyphosate that could end up in rivers. And we don't know as farmers how that could happen, because glyphosate would bind to soil before it would want to go anywhere. So it would have to physically get into the river. And yet after 5 years, the rate of AMPA, which is a derivative of glyphosate, tests in the water had not changed. So then they said, well, why? How could this be? Like, we thought it was the damn farmers. Guess what? When we treat wastewater, including in the city of Saskatoon, we use phosphonates. Phosphonates can be converted in wastewater treatment to AMPA, which is what they've been detecting all along. Where are the phosphonates coming from? Detergent. So if you're a consumer, you don't like glyphosate, if you want us to quit using it on our farms, you better quit washing your clothes. Because that has scientifically been documented. Now, not in every river, in every case, but in fact, it's really quite interesting. If you use mascara or makeup, 10% of that is phosphonates. When you wash it off your eyes and wherever that goes into the waste system, those phosphonates can be converted to AMPA. So this is a much more complex thing than we've discussed. Now, also in my book, I talk about another thing, and that is that when they tested out the carcinogenity of glyphosate, they fed it at the equivalent of 80 mils per day. So if you drank 80 milliliters, a shot glass of Roundup every day for 2 years, was the studies that they did on rats. And the rats never did develop any lymphoma or any carcinogenity. Never did. 95% of the trials have documented that. And so Roundup has been getting more and more of a clean bill of health. The most researched compound known to man is glyphosate. But glyphosate has saved our farms and our soil. So what's more important in the world than glyphosate? We can go on there. I know you see her flagging me there. I'd be happy to carry on the conversation. I talked to Moxie's next door. After we're all done, we're gonna go over there and have a cocktail. You can charge the first drink to me if you bought a book. And we can have a visit there, but I'm more than happy to sit down here and if you'd like a book signed and we want to have more discussion, thank you. So I appreciate you all coming out and.
A quick question. With your critical thinking that you use on a daily basis, would you not consider running for government?
No. Evan Bray asked me the other day what I thought about Trudeau quitting, and I said, well, I think he's gonna have time to read my book now. Maybe he'll learn how to cultivate relationships instead of. Good, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody coming.